Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's meeting of the Audit Committee. As ever, this meeting is being recorded. Can I ask members and those attending to ensure that all electronic equipment is in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. Now, first of all, can I ask if there are any apologies?
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies from Councillors Band and Audrey Coates, with Councillors Williamson and Jarvis substituting. Thank you, Provost. Provost, Convener.
Provost. Hurrah. Thank you very much for that. Now, before we go on to the business of the meeting, I would ask Lisa Simpson, Chief Legal Officer, to make a comment regarding item 7 on the agenda, which is the Cash Office Review.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to raise a few points with reference to the audit report on today's agenda in respect of the review of cash office procedures. Whilst, as you're aware, the issue for this committee is to consider the system of internal control and any recommended improvement actions flowing from internal audit's review, the publicity that has followed, and in particular the headline in last Thursday's Courier, has shifted the focus to the conduct of the individual in question. I appreciate that this committee will be seeking assurances from officers, and to enable us to have an open discussion on this, and in the circumstances, I would ask that this paper be considered on private on the basis that the information that you may wish to discuss relates to an individual, and as such that information is exempt under paragraph 1 of Schedule 7A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Whilst we are still in public session, however, I would like to clarify the significant inaccuracies in last week's Courier article, with a view to not only providing assurance to the members of this committee, but also with a view to reassuring members of the public, and in particular the residents of Perth Kinross. Contrary to the headline, I can confirm that no resident received any additional or erroneous bill for any amount in connection with these activities, let alone a single resident receiving a bill for a shocking £12,470. The activities in question involved a series of low-level transactions over a period of time which made initial detection difficult. The individual has repaid the money in full, so there has been no financial detriment whatsoever to any individual resident or indeed to the wider public in terms of the monies collected. I can also advise that the Council has put in place a number of immediate improvement actions. I would suggest, therefore, that if we are happy to take this matter in private, which is my advice, that we move this to the end of the agenda.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, members, two aspects to this. First of all, do we agree to consider this matter in private? Are we agreed on this? We're agreed. Thank you. And do we agree to move the item on the agenda from item 7 to item 8 to wind up the meeting with this discussion? Councillor Wilson.
Convener, I'm very happy to agree with both of these points that you've made. I think in view of this, the serious inaccuracies, and this is a procedural process question, nothing to do with the detail, that was in the local press, it may be appropriate for you and the Head of Legal and Governance to consider issuing a press release in due course. I see there is one member of the local press corps with us. They arrived, I think, before Lisa had finished as she was in full flow of her statement. And I think if there has been inaccuracies in the press, there ought to be an opportunity for you, sir, and appropriate senior officers to correct these, considering there's a reputational matter for the Council at stake.
Thank you. Is there any other comments to be made? What I would say about that is the comments that Lisa has made, I appreciate that a member of the press has come in during your statement there, Lisa, and it may be useful to make clear to the press who are present today what you have already said. Whether we decide as a committee that further comment is necessary following our deliberations in private, then we can take a view then, I think, on whether further statement needs to be made. Obviously, the meeting is being recorded, and so what has been said already and what will be said later on will, in due course, be available in the public domain. Having said that, there's obviously no intention to for this to be made into to go into the public domain while there are live or potential live proceedings against any individuals, and when that individual may or may not be identified.
Point out the private session.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I would just like to support what Councillor Wilson said. I think it is important from the public's point of view that what Mrs Simpson has just outlined there is absolutely clear for the public, and I think just issuing what she said in the public session as the press release would be helpful, because even that part of the meeting might not be released until after the papers have reported on the meeting, essentially. Indeed,
and just to be clear that the private session and deliberations will remain in private. Okay, thank you for that. So moving on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee dated the 26th of September. Yeah, are there any declarations of interest in any items on the agenda today? Nope. Thank you. So the minutes of the meeting of the 26th of September, are there any comments or inaccuracies? Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, just to follow up on the minutes, it was stated 2 staff had been recruited to the internal audit team, are both now in place, and are you now at a full complement?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, they're both in post now, and yes, we're fully staffed. And
I'm right in saying one of the internal auditors now has a specialist IT skills. Does that auditor, and hence we don't have to rely on Highland Council anymore to effectively buy in services, does that internal auditor, is it specialism purely in IT, or does he or she have transferable skills, can cover other areas?
She is both a general auditor and a specialist IT auditor, so she covers all aspects of internal audit.
Right, because just looking ahead at the work plan, there's quite a lot of stuff coming up in January. No, that's good. Good news.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, can we agree the minutes of the meeting of the 26th of September? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 4, which is the regular internal audit follow-up report. Jackie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is the general audit report on the follow-up actions. With those 39 agreed actions, which we will be following up in due course. 2 of which are included within the appendices, both of which relate to the review of authorised signatories, which is ongoing. There remains 1 action which was regarded as high risk during that particular audit, and that relates to a personalisation audit in Education and Children's Services. But I'm happy to take any other comments on, or questions on this report.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks for the update. On pages 15 and I think 17, we've got a target date of August 2018, which is a distant memory for all of us now, and January 2019. Are we still on target for the annual review to be complete by the 31st of December 2018, and the implementation of that, the long-awaited authorised signatory database template by Corporate Finance in January 2019?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. You'll see later in the papers that there's reference to the authorised signatories database being completed in December, so which should allow the services to complete these actions in January.
Yes, we're on target.
I'm assured that we are, so yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Very quickly, am I right in saying once that's completed, that also ties in with the IDEA software package as well? They link in together, yes?
No, they don't actually link together, but we will be able to utilise IDEA to extract information which will be relevant to future audits, and it'll be useful for us to be able to do that.
Oh, right, okay. Thanks.
Okay, any further questions? No, thank you. Can we agree to note the report? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5, which is the internal audit update. Again, Jackie, can I ask you to say a few words?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, just really to highlight to members that at 1.4 we work with the services with regard to the National Fraud Initiative exercises, and those data sets have now been uploaded. So we'll be able to get the outcomes from those coming through anytime after January next year, once the Cabinet Office releases those matches. And as has already been said, the internal audit team is now fully staffed, so we should be able to make a decent headway with the planned audits. We've had a number of pieces of work which have been in addition to the planned workload, and if these cause a problem with regard to the completion of the plan, I'll bring that information back to the next committee.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Again, are there any questions? Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I notice in Appendix 2 that we're planning on doing an audit of the Tay-Cities deal in March 2019. Do we feel we're going to be in a position to have enough information really to do an audit by that point?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's certainly within the internal audit plan, and closer to that date, we'll review where we are and the appropriateness of investing any internal audit resources at that point in time. But I can't actually give you a straight answer, I'm afraid.
I think it's a very valid point, Councillor McDade, and I think that may well be something that that is delayed for reasons out with the control of anyone around this table. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, just on the, and I understand in Tay-Cities that it's movable feast possibly. For January we've got ALIOs. Is that going to cover all of the ALIOs, including Live Active Leisure, Tayside Contracts, Cross, obviously, and Culture PKC?
At this point in time, the scope hasn't been firmly decided, but I can certainly contact you with nearer the time once that has been finalised as to what the coverage will be. But really, just referring back to the original plan should give an indication as to that.
And we are definitely going to be covering on welfare reform. I guess that will be on universal credit.
Yes, that's ongoing throughout the year to be able to provide assurance that the council is putting in appropriate measures to be able to manage the impact of universal credit and other welfare reform.
And that, along with workforce planning, that would look at capacity issues.
That would be included within the overall scope.
Right. Okay. And finally, can I just, we're going on to March and May. Are we going to take local action partnerships separately from community empowerment? It just seems those two kind of link in together.
Yes, they do link in together. The The local action partnerships is a defined audit, a standalone audit, whereas the other is some time that's been set aside to be able to provide consultancy advice to the service. So they're two different things and they're very different approaches.
Okay.
Thank you. And can I just ask Gillian to just provide that little bit of clarity on the ALIOs, please?
Yeah, just to remind the committee that the three ALIOs are Horsecross, Culture Perth and Kinross and Live Active Leisure, and that Tayside Contracts is not an ALIO. It's a completely separate entity and it's not part of it. So, no, that wouldn't fall within that.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. I'm on page 25 and 26. Although it's probably slightly early in the audit year, if I can put it that way, I see that in the second column, assignment brief approved. Some of these been done in April, and I'm conscious of the fact that we've been 2 persons down in the section for some time. My question's twofold. Has there any other assignment briefs been approved, particularly when we get over to page 26? Because that column seems to be relatively unpopulated, and I would have thought that, given that the approval of these in April, there would have been some more approved by now. And secondly, how are we generally on target for achieving our plan within the year, since we've had staff shortage? And thirdly, and I'm not sure if I've read this correctly or not, Convener, so forgive me, on page 20, going back to page 25 again, 1811 School Estate Strategy, anticipated audit committee November 2018, assignment brief approved September 2018, and then the factual accuracy confirmed November 2019. I don't understand that.
The 2019 is an error. It should be November 2018. For the factual accuracy confirmed, if I can just deal with that one straight away. The finalisation of assignment briefs tends to occur immediately at the start of an audit. So, where there are gaps, we may well be working on assignment briefs. We certainly are for a number of these of the assignments. So they're likely to be finalised imminently. With regard to some of the other areas, for example, idea implementation and transformation, those are longer term projects which will take place over the whole year. As a result, I wouldn't have expected those to be any further on. With the new staff on board, Moira has undertaken a review and we are on track to be able to deliver the audit plan.
Convener, thanks. I'm reassured by that, but I'd like at the next meeting to see at least the assignment brief approved column a lot more full than it is at the moment, because that's the first stage in the audit, and once you've got to decide what the brief is, then you can proceed with the work. And I'm just anxious that we appear to be in the face of it falling behind, but I'm reassured by the Chief Internal Auditor's reassurances that we're maybe a little bit behind, but we can catch up, as I think
that would be correct.
How would I describe it? Thank you.
I think these are valid points, Councillor Wilson, and thank you for that input. And yeah, we are a little behind schedule, but we can catch up. Councillor McDade.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. It's page 25, 1811, the School Estate Strategy. Is that analysing the consultation process that's ongoing as a wider thing, or is that a specific part of the property strategy?
It is looking at the property strategy. The actual the scope of the audit, if it would be helpful, I could certainly email out to you what the control objectives are, which will be coming forward at the next audit committee, if that would be helpful.
That'd be useful, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Any further questions at all? Okay, can we agree to note that report? Great. Thank you. Moving swiftly on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the external audit external quality assessment, which has been carried out by the Acting Chief Internal Auditor of South Ayrshire Council on our behalf. Jackie.
Thank you, Convener. The Acting Chief Internal Auditor for South Ayrshire, who undertook the validation of the self-assessment, is no longer in post, and she's been replaced by a permanent Chief Internal Auditor, who unfortunately sends her apologies for not being able to be here today, but her equivalent of the Audit Committee also takes place today. Obviously, as I'm sure you can appreciate, she would need to be within her own local authority for that. The requirement for the public sector internal audit standards is that the internal audit function is subject to a formal review, and what you see in front of you is the outcome from that, which is the external quality assessment. South Ayrshire Council came in and validated an assessment which is undertaken every year, and they took the most recent assessment and validated the information that was on there. What is pleasing to note is that as a council, as an internal audit function, we fully conform with the public sector internal audit standards, and it's good that that's actually been validated. And there are a couple of areas of good practice which have also been highlighted within the report. There are a number of actions which are arising, which we're taking forward. The one area which was highlighted as general inconformance relates to the action that's outstanding from that, relates to a review of 2 job descriptions, namely mine and the Senior Internal Auditor. They haven't been reviewed since 2010. They're not necessarily out of date, but they're not reflecting public sector internal audit standards. It's the CIPFA's code of practice from before then. So that's the area that's the action that that comes out from there. But overall, as I said, there's some good practice come out of it. There's an action plan which we will be working to deliver, and it's perfectly achievable. And some areas were already part and parcel of the work plan for the rest of the year anyway. But I'm happy to take any comments or questions that you have on this.
Thanks again, Jackie. And obviously it's pleasing that this is a positive report that has been received, and it's a credit to yourself and your team that is the case. As you mentioned at the end there, there is an action plan emanating from some of the findings that have been made. Most of these are in the category of housekeeping, with only 2 under the category of requiring addressing. So again, that's a generally positive state of affairs in my humble opinion, but obviously members, if you have any questions on the content of this report. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think it's an excellent report. There's not been a need for a full external assessment, although I would assume that's only when there are, apparent difficulties. But certainly looking at the table, it comes over very well indeed, and I think you and your team should be complimented, Jackie. The one thing I noticed, and we don't want to clutter you up with a lot of admin, but it does state on page 34 the need to develop a suite of key performance indicators. Excuse me, what kind of KPIs would you probably be looking at?
Thank you, Councillor. Some of the KPIs that you may be interested in are reported as part of the annual report. So, for example, the number of staff, the number of qualified staff, the number of actions year on year, those are included within the annual report. One of the things that I'm proposing to do is to look at what options there are for key performance indicators that you as a committee would like to see brought forward. Our main key performance indicator is the completion of the audit plan. And also, along with that, I would say, is actually fully conforming with the public sector internal audit standards. You know, those are the two kind of major things. We do fully conform, and the plans are routinely completed. So those are the two major performance indicators. But I'll look at what else is out there, do a bit of benchmarking with other local authorities, see what they're reporting to their audit committees, and then bring something back to you for what would be meaningful for you. As far as I'm concerned, there's no point in collecting a whole lot of information that's of little use. So I want to make sure that what we decide on is going to be meaningful and useful.
Just to follow up on that, yeah, I think what you're really indicating, because we don't want to, clutter you up with all sorts of admin, is more a question of fine-tuning, and perhaps it's maybe things like response times to requests for external advice, or although I think we've already got policy in place, how we deal with whistleblowers and respond in these instances. But I think you're saying it's nothing major, it's nothing root and branch, it's more, some additional factors that we need to elements to put in. No.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. On page 37, it's point 3. The performance appraisal of the Chief Internal Auditor should be countersigned by either the Chief Executive or the Convener. And then in the management comment, it says the employee review and development arrangements within Perth Kinross Council do not facilitate this. The Head of Legal and Governance Services will ensure that the Convener, the Chief Executive and the Convener are informed of any matters which may have an influence on the Chief Internal Auditor's statutory role. I'm just wondering if we can get a bit more detail about why that is not possible to have the countersigning by the Chief Executive or the Convener.
The current employee review and development arrangements are more discussive rather than formulaically written down. But one of the things that Lisa and I have spoken about is how to ensure that that all aspects are reflected, and that's something that we're going to work on to ensure that either the Chief Executive or the Convener has an input in advance. But equally, one of the things that I would say is that if there were any issues which were relevant, I would anticipate and hope that neither would leave it until the ERD process to raise any issues. And likewise, if there were any issues affecting my role, that would get escalated as well. The ERD is part and parcel of the workforce management that's in place. However, we also have one-to-one meetings, so the actual ERD itself is not so much of a major thing because of the monthly one-to-ones that we have.
Thanks, Jackie. And I would just add, we have discussed this at the pre-agenda meeting, and there is the intention that there be regular diarised meetings between Jackie and our new Chief Executive sitting in the public gallery over there, who to openly discuss anything on an ongoing basis. The thing that has impressed me most in getting to understand this is the active way in which performance is assessed on an ongoing and regular basis. It doesn't wait for an annual performance review, and it is open to both the Chief Executive and myself to input into that process at any time. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Well, you'll be relieved to know that the Chief Internal Auditor has virtually answered my first question, which was, can all these actions be achieved within the timescales? I always have a concern, though, that we, rather than being sprinkled through a number of months, they're bunched, because this month and I think next month's busy, and then March 2019 is very busy. So maybe just to make sure that bunching in March is still achievable is my first question.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, this should be, because those are dates when they will be completed by, not necessarily in that month. So it could be that some elements of those are completed in advance of March.
Thank you. If I might just ask one more thing, I think, Convener, and I'm on page I think the very introduction, the executive summary on page 33.1.1, the report's been prepared in compliance with, and we've got a whole set of acronyms here. I won't attempt to pronounce them, but well, I'll pronounce them but not summarise them. In public sector internal audit standards, I noticed 2013 is, given that this is an auditor auditing the auditors, basically, and I think that's good as a strength in local government. We have that capacity and the facility to do that. But on these standards in 2013, the world's moved on a bit since 2013. Is there any plans to review them and update them, particularly since they're based on international professional practice framework, which sounds as if it's older, so we might be 10 years away from the original documentation, certainly 5 or 6 years away from the original documentation. Is there a built-in process for review and renewal?
Thank you. The public sector internal audit standards have been subject to a review since 2013, and a few tweaks, but nothing of any substance has changed within that review. Whether the Institute of Internal Auditors or SIPFA have any plans for a complete rewrite, I don't know. It's certainly not something that's been shared with the internal audit profession as yet. But as these are based on international standards, they will be sort of around for a while, I would imagine.
Thank you for that response. Convener, we could maybe find out, and it's not an urgent task to find out, but I think it would be useful. And perhaps we could receive in due course, and maybe March next year is a time for a report, a progress report. It only need to be on one page, Convener. We don't need a lot of paper expended in that process, but it would be, I think it would be worthwhile, so we can sign this off as a committee, so we find out if there are any outstanding things that haven't been tackled or are difficult. Then we can support our colleagues in Chief Internal Audit Service to make sure the job's complete.
Okay, yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Nope. In that case, can we agree to note this report? Thank you. Okay, now, as indicated earlier, moving on to what is published as item 8 on the agenda under the Housing and Environment banner, the management of contracts. Now, we have with us today Mary Mitchell, who is the corporate procurement manager, and that sounds like quite a task. So welcome to the committee. But can I ask Jackie to introduce this report in the first place, and then we can ask yourself if you can add some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The audit of management of contracts, the objective of that was to ensure the adequacy of arrangements in respect of contract management, which is quite a wide objective. As part of that, 5 contracts were selected from specifically Housing and Environment Service, as this is one of the largest commissioning and procuring services. Part of this audit feeds into the work that Mary does and provides Mary Mitchell as our procurement manager with information which is useful to her for her to ensure that there's appropriate developments throughout the council. From this audit, you can see that we're satisfied that appropriate authority was in place to enter into contracts, and that was something that was raised in the last audit. There are a number of areas which have been highlighted within this report. What was pleasing is that some of the areas was addressed very swiftly. So you can see that some of these actions were completed by the time that the audit report was issued. The outcomes from each of the individual contracts that were reviewed were reported back in detail to each of the project managers and relevant senior managers and heads of service, and also to Mary Mitchell, so that these could then be useful documents, some of which have actually been used as part of training already delivered within the teams that I'm aware of. So they're actually being used, and they are facilitating lessons learned from those contracts, which can be rolled out more widely. I'm sure that Mary will have some background information about the value and the volume of contracting activity, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, perhaps if at this stage, with the committee's approval, we can ask Mary to give her comments, and then questions can be directed either at Mary or at Jackie as appropriate thereafter. Thanks, Mary.
Beg your pardon. Circulated prior to committee some supplementary information which was based on previous comments we'd had around this report. That paper focuses on the broader context, how much procurement do we actually do, and how is it that we should do it, how's that set out for us in both legislation and in national best practice guidance. So the first part of that supplementary information is the context. There is clear legislation about how we should conduct ourselves in respect of procurement. And the diagram at the bottom of that page just summarises some of the best practice guidance that's in place. The audit, as you will have picked up, deals with the third section, the zone that's called contract, and that's the contract management activity, the processes for awarding a contract, the authority that exists to do that, how the contract is put in place, and how we ensure it will work for us as specified in the documents, and what work's done to keep that work going throughout the life cycle of the contract is part of that guidance. And in terms of how that those 5 contracts in the report fit into our broader work, as you'll see from some of the numbers that are emboldened on page 2 of that supplementary information, there's a large number of contracts in place at any one time. Our current contract register has 671 active contracts in place at the moment. So it's a sample from quite a big environment. As you know, Jackie did a similar audit last year, also entitled Management of Contracts, just as part of that continuous review work around those pieces of contracting activity. Moving on, just around the support and training that's in place for people who are involved in both putting the specification together and then beyond that managing it. There were some recommendations in the report about how we target those people more proactively, if you like, and making sure that the documentation is really explicit about what responsibilities pass to individuals. Our contract rules already set out the roles and responsibilities someone takes on as a contract manager, so a bit more training around that is part of what we will now do. And I suppose for context, I suppose around the assurance process, similarly to Jackie's function, the internal audit function, procurement is also subject to an external assessment, which we completed in October as well. And we had as clean a bill of health, I suppose, as it's possible to have, in that there are 5 grades, if you like, conferred on public bodies that go through that assessment, and we are in the top grade for that. So we've had, there are 4 sort of themes in that: leadership and governance, tender development, the contract management work, and the systems and processes we have in place as an organisation that are assessed as part of that. Quite a similar, that sounds like quite a similar process to the review of internal audit. It's a self-assessment that's then verified by an independent team. So I suppose what I'm trying to say there around the assessment process, Jackie's feeding into making sure that the planning work that we now do is appropriate for the situation we're at currently. And we've got a number of recommendations, but also the information about each individual contract is helpful to us to think about what do we include in our training, what gaps have people got in their knowledge, that type of thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that report, very helpful. Are there any questions, Councillor Wilson?
Thanks again, Convener. I'm on the, I want to come on to the supplementary information in a moment, if I may, but I'm on the main body of the report. There are, I think, 6 actions, and it's pleasing to note that Mr. Fraser-Crofts has been very busy in completed all his in record time. Thanks for that. I take it that everybody's happy, they're complete and they've got bedded into the system is my first question.
Yes, thanks for the question. Absolutely. A communication was issued very promptly to all procuring officers within the service by way of an inside news and targeted also specifically by way of email, addressing all of the audit findings and reinforcing the need for essentially what are procedural issues requiring reinforcement. So that's what we've done promptly, and that's supported by heads of service and the management team.
Thank you. My second question on the main body of the report, Convener, is we've got targets in October 2018, which is just passed. In December 2018, are we on schedule for delivering these 3 dates? I think.
Just for clarity, that's on action point 3 you're
Yep.
referring to, yeah.
3 and 6, I think. Yeah. And 2.
Okay. So, are you able to comment?
No, the actions on there.
Mary,
so to with
yep.
Mr. Councillor.
Particularly on action point 2, we are on track there. I need to provide Jackie with the evidence of that being in place, but actually action point 1 has really linked very neatly into that. The communication that came from Fraser has prompted a lot of people to self-select for that training. So we have got a calendar of dates right through 2019 of training that's in place, and we've been a bit more explicit about what is expected of you in terms of coming to that training, and we've actually started declining some of the self-selects where we think they're looking for the wrong sort of training for the work they're doing. So that's a bit of a change. So we've already embedded some of that. So.
Thank you. That latter point, Convener, is particularly helpful because helping guide people towards the most appropriate training is something that I think is really important given the pressures on everybody's time. Could you indulge me in one more question?
Of course.
The supplementary information, which I found useful, it took a while, took 2 or 3 reads for me to get my head around it and understand a bit of it, but on the second page where there's the wee map of Scotland, 68% Scottish SMEs, is that small and medium enterprises?
Yes,
Is that what that
yes.
means? Okay. And in the bottom right hand corner of that wee diagram, there's 375 community benefits were agreed and 129 were delivered. I'm about to ask what happened to the balance. I don't do arithmetic, so the X number that were not delivered, was it not delivered in time, or are they still in the pipeline, or were they abandoned, or what?
A combination of the first two is the answer to that, but this is an extract from our annual report on procurement that came to SPNR in April. So it was really included here as an illustration of the sort of statistics that we include in our statutory annual report. That question actually came up at committee, and at that point those 129 were in delivery. We haven't abandoned any that I can think of, so they're all either in delivery or now complete, because we're obviously a number of months on since this was compiled.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, thank you. It's in connection with action point 2, training, and it says in the body of the report that may be reconsidered for contracts under the value of 50,000 and then repeated again under the action point. Contracts could sometimes be broken up for ease of management. Would it not be better to look at that with a little bit more deliberation than may, and that the training be offered to not necessarily all officers doing contracts, but maybe lowering the 50,000 limit so that you don't get in this position?
Yeah, I think it's possibly all about resourcing more than anything else, and is it not? Okay, Mary, when you go.
It's actually about the legislation. So the legislative requirement is for contracts above 50,000 to be treated in a particular way. So we've got 2 tranches, if you like, of spend. With Scottish legislation that applies from 50,000 up to a threshold that's set by the EU legislation that's in place. So 2 different types of work that need to be
we need to provide assurance of. At those two levels below 50,000, it's our own in-house governance that supports those contracts, which is why we make the distinction at that figure.
Right, okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. I have two questions. First of all, to follow up on training. I'm glad that we're going to be putting more resource into training, but we did see in the last budget in February this year a number of the training budgets across the council actually being cut, and that's simply a fact. Environmental services were by 15%. I think IT budget was by some 30%. So I want to ask you on the training front, both this financial year, next financial year, do you have the resources to put in place the capacity to actually deliver on training, or is the training that you're going to give the staff more in terms of on-the-job training?
So the training we provide at the moment is resourced by a combination of the work that my team do with individuals. So we have set presentations that we use with them, and legal services also support that in terms of contract law, understanding contract law and what might be done within the bounds of the contract that you have in place. So it's in-house resource in the main that's used for procurement training. We do spend a small budget on training my staff so that they have the current understanding of the position. In terms of whether we have the budget for that, at the moment we do, and February 2019, I suppose, is yet to come before we'll see what the level of resourcing is beyond that.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I don't think the sums involved here financially are a huge amount, but it is the question of, you know, do you have the resources, the capacity? Going, second question, it's on page 57. The sample size, Jackie, was 5, but I think one can understand why it was quite a small sample size, because, you know, complexities, I think, of some of these contracts, it takes a lot of time to work through. I think I'm right in saying you've tried to cover, you know, across the range in terms of contract size, but you state in the second para on page 57, 2 of the 5 contracts reviewed were not notified to Public Contracts Scotland within the appropriate time limit. Could I just ask, how far out with that time limit were we? And if that was something to be, I suspect it won't be, but was to be a recurring factor, what sanction might there be against the council, or is it more one of reputational risk?
I'm not certain on the number of days, but we can certainly come back to you on that, because that would be part of the detail of the audit, I think. In terms of the recurring nature of it, I receive a report on the first Monday of every month about all of those contracts from the system that have not yet been awarded, and we follow those up. We have a tracker in place in the procurement team, follow up with officers and services. Where the contract is above the EU threshold, there is a stipulated 30-day window after the contract's awarded, and it's about the transparency of that public decision making. The sanctions for that, I suppose there is a bit of legal risk around that somebody could challenge a flaw to our process, and that's why that appeared as a high risk action in a previous audit. So we haven't experienced any sanctions, and I'm not aware of any council ever having experienced any sanctions for missing that 30-day window, but it's possible, I think.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. This is more a question for Jackie, I think. It's page 52. It's in the sort of background introduction, and following Gillian's clarification earlier that Tayside Contracts is not an arm's length organisation, the third paragraph under the heading background and introduction refers to it as an arm's length organisation. The other question I had was at the bottom bit, scope and limitations. It talks about administered commission services or Tayside Procurement Consortium are not being reviewed as part of this. Could you explain to us if they're reviewed in other ways?
These are separate audits as part of the the audit universe that I review every year and are assessed as such. I'm aware that some elements of Tayside Procurement Consortium are audited by other councils, particularly Dundee and Angus. So I would need to take advice from them as to what their coverage is of such as Tayside Procurement Consortium. With regards for Tayside contracts, then we would potentially look at the management of our relationship with Tayside contracts as a separate audit, or look at elements of contracting with Tayside contracts, either through an audit of school meals or through the road maintenance partnership, as we have done in the past. So we would cover those elsewhere in those reports.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, can we agree to note the report and the actions and intended actions contained therein? Thank you. Thank you.